Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope it's going great, as I always say, and in this video, I have an absolutely crazy story. I think my laptop's making noises. I have a crazy story from Wyoming. So, if that sounds like your cup of tea, then definitely pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. This happened in 2011. Toward the end of October, and yes, it's technically an airsoft story, but it's definitely not what you're thinking. So, I play on a pretty good airsoft team, and we go to quite a few regionals and some national events just for fun. It's a good hobby. We don't think we're super elite Navy SEAL operators or anything like that, but we have been to military simulation games before, or MilSim. I live in a mountain state in the western US, and there are a lot of military bases out here. There's a camp in a bordering state that uses airsoft players to fill the Op 4 role for special forces who come to train at the base. Mostly, the guys who train at the camp are airborne, National Guard, or Green Berets. When the Special Forces guys, mostly Green Berets, come out to train, the camp will contact local or regional airsoft teams that have a bit of a reputation for winning their tournaments to come out and be Op 4 for the Special Forces guys. It's just so they can get in some training against people that they aren't familiar with, which is mostly CQB and MOUT. As far as the airsofters are concerned, they obviously do a lot more specialty training than this, but this is just what we're involved in, and these places are tens of thousands of acres. The reason that I'm explaining all this is because usually mentioning that my hobby is airsoft usually gets me called names or tortured, but whatever. And I promise the story does get interesting and weird, but I just want to explain the background. Anyway, I'll get to the point. Our team went out to the camp for 3 days of MOUT or CQB training to help with the Green Berets. We played the first and second day on a small MOUT site that they had set up. That night, we had just finished dinner when a Special Forces guy came over and told us that they got the call of a missing NG over the radio. That is, NG being National Guard. We walked over and had a quick briefing with about 100 other guys, a few of them being fellow airsofters, and the rest being military. The camp commander told us that we were all being sent on a search and rescue to find the missing guardsman. His team was doing a land nav that day, and he hadn't reported in by 1800 hours when the nav exercise was over. We got set up with National Guard radios and all got the same channel with the military guys. We gathered what little survival gear that we brought, grabbed some chem lights and plenty of flashlights with extra batteries. We put on these heavy winter coats and caps with warm socks. The temperature was expected to drop to 8 degrees Fahrenheit that night. After a 20-minute or so walk, we got to the lost guy's last possible location, according to where he was supposed to be at that time on his land nav. About a dozen guys are already there, and they tell us to head up over a hill to our left, and then follow a ravine north. Another 20 minutes go by, and we're heading up the ravine. Like I mentioned earlier, it was late October, so there were no leaves on the trees, except for pine needles, but those aren't leaves, obviously. We walked a few more minutes in the ravine, then hiked up a hill. It was in a small dirt path, until we came to a crest on the ridge. It was too dark to see anything below us in front, and our flashlights weren't powerful enough to be used past about 150 feet. So, we switched on our 200 lumen tack lights on our guns. I've been in the forest during the fall and winter months plenty of times, but this forest in front of us really creeped me out for some reason. All the trees were dead, but also very clustered, so it was difficult to see through them. On both sides there were small cliffs with pines, which blocked any moonlight and made the stand of trees that much darker. I could tell that a few other guys on our team were a little nervous too, but the fact that there were 7 of us total was some kind of consolation to this. The squad leader said that we were going through it because walking on the ridges would be too dangerous in the dark. So, we walked about 50 yards down the edge of the forest. At that point, we radioed back to command to let them know where we were, and that we were heading into the forest. We also got on the regular channel and let everyone else know too. Then, we slipped into the dense forest, single file, and kept on hiking. We kept in contact by repeating, "X, still here," X being each of our names, every minute or so. This was especially important to keep track of our last man and make sure that nobody got lost. So, about 200 yards into this dense forest, we start hearing crackling and rustling noises. This was at our 11 o'clock. We start calling out the name of the missing guy, but we get no response. We radioed everyone to let them know what was going on. At that point, we hung a couple chem lights on the trees to mark our last position in case anyone else came through, and then we continued on. We had only gone about another mile when we started to hear very loud screaming coming from straight ahead, probably only about 100 yards away. We all took a knee along either side of our path and stayed as quiet as possible. The screams stopped, and after about 4 minutes of silence, we were almost ready to move on when suddenly the screaming started again. But this time it was coming from our 10 o'clock. After a few seconds, our team leader turned around to say something, but the screaming started again, but this time at our 2 o'clock. We all perked up at that point, and soon there were multiple screams coming everywhere from our 10 to our 2 o'clocks. We figured that it had to be some kind of animal because there was no one else out there, and there was only one guy that was missing. So, we kept advancing, and the screams continued, still from our 10 to 2 o'clocks as we moved forward. After about 150 yards, we thought that we would be right in the center of whatever was screaming, but it was still coming from in front of us. The squad lead stopped, turned, and told us he heard running water up ahead. After a few more feet, we came to a small stream. We crossed carefully on some stones, and then moved another 200 feet or so until we came to a sunken area in the forest, where there was a 20-foot gap/clearing between the trees. We paused, gathered round, then decided to try to catch the animals off guard and maybe catch a glimpse of some reflective eyes in the distance. The screaming was still going on, but hadn't got louder, or quieter for that matter, with us moving forward. We all lined up and turned on our tack lights at the same time. We were also aiming straight ahead. The screaming stopped instantly. All I could see was the row of gray, dead trees in front of us, and pure darkness right behind them. The hair on my arms was completely raised at that point, because whatever had been screaming now knew that we were there once we turned on our lights. We were about to shift positions and move into better cover when we heard an extremely loud roar come from our front. I've heard bears, mountain lions, and other wilderness critters roar before, but this was like nothing I had ever heard in my life. It definitely wasn't human, and it wasn't any recognizable animal either. We all immediately trained our lights on where we heard the roar and went to prone. Some of the guys started to whisper, "Oh shit, what the hell is that?" but stopped as soon as the other roar came from behind us, and in a few seconds, the roars were coming from all around us, and suddenly, we heard one come from our 8 o'clock that sounded like it was only a few feet away. It was at this point that our squad leader got up on one knee and said, "Get up, we're moving now," in an urgent, not screwing around voice. We all stood up and immediately started sprinting toward our 1 o'clock, the opposite direction of the closest roar. I don't even remember how long we ran, only jumping over logs and trying not to get caught on the branches or dead grass. When the path was clear of debris, I would shine my light to the left through the trees for a couple seconds, and then switch back to the path to see where I was going. The roaring kept coming from both sides and seemed to close in on us. Luckily, I never saw anything with my light while I was running. I didn't want to see, but at the same time, it was almost worse not knowing what was chasing us. We finally reached the riverbank, and all of us literally leaped about 12 feet across because our adrenaline was pumping that hard. When we landed on the other side, we scrambled up a hill with some pines and hid behind the trees. Although we were only a few feet from each other, we kept our lights scanning the tree line below us. My adrenaline was really going at that point, and my body felt like it was about 1/10 the weight that it actually was. That was the most intense fight-or-flight moment of my life. Although my vision was sharp, my hearing was crystal clear, and I didn't feel any weight, all because of the adrenaline. I managed to keep my arms steady and my light pointed below us. After a couple minutes, I realized that something was rattling heavily to my left. I checked over my shoulder and saw my teammate shaking so hard his gear was rattling around like all hell on his body. I shifted my position and put my hand on his shoulder, but he immediately jerked his arm so hard my hand went flying. I looked right into his eyes, and I have never seen that much fear in my entire life. His pupils were dilated so much that I almost couldn't see the whites of his eyes. I tell my buddy that we put some distance between ourselves and whatever was chasing us and that we're going to be okay. Luckily, he hadn't totally lost it yet, and he nods to acknowledge what I said. We sit up on the hill for about 10 full minutes just trying to get our shit together and let the adrenaline subside. Finally, I scoot over to squad lead and ask for his radio. He fumbles for a minute, then he hands it to me with a shaking hand. I'm pretty sure, or at least I felt like the most level-headed one on our team right then. So I called on the radio to let the other teams know what was happening. It took me about 2 minutes of uninterrupted talking on the radio to explain our situation, because I was also badly shaken and had to repeat and correct myself every 2 seconds. Soon, there was radio traffic, reporting the exact same type of thing happening with other squads. This made us feel slightly relieved, until we realized that whatever was roaring wasn't just isolated to the one area. At that point, we decided to get the hell out of the area and stay on the ridges, where at least we had some visibility below us and weren't surrounded by a dense grove of trees. We walked about half a mile along the ridge. Then we had to drop down onto a dirt path because the hilltop was too steep to continue. After some more walking, we came to a small cluster of the same dead trees. Although we were on the opposite side of the hill where we were chased, we were still on the edge though, and slowly approached the trees with our lights off and with no communication. When we were about 25 feet away, we saw some movement and immediately froze in place. My adrenaline kicked in, and I thought, this is it. No more running. It's going to attack us. Right here. Right now. In the middle of nowhere. And no one, not my family, not my friends, will know what happened to me. Before I had the chance to swing my light up, 4 lights beamed in our direction, blinding us. Search team? It took us a few seconds, but both the squad leader and I said yes at the same time. The guys in the trees pointed their lights down and told us to come toward them. I thought my team was scared to death, but these 4 guys were as white as sheets. They asked if we had heard the howling and screaming too, and we replied yes. And then we said we had been chased a few minutes earlier. They said the exact thing had happened to them, only they had stayed in place and had been stalked, circled, until they heard us approaching a few hundred feet away. After we linked up with the 4 new guys, we got the hell out of there and continued north, hoping to find some other squads, just to, at least, increase our numbers and feel safer. After about 5 minutes into the walk, I heard a loud thump behind me, and everybody immediately turns around, expecting to see whatever had been roaring. We see a man laying down on his stomach but still moving. We all thought he had been attacked, but he got up onto his knees and started slapping his chest, indicating that he had the wind knocked out of him. All he did was point down to his right. As we looked closer, we saw a piece of rebar where his foot was, and there was some concrete right under it. We all gathered around him. Someone helped him up, and the 2 squad leads decided to check the area to our 4 o'clock for the rest of the concrete structure. We only fanned out a few feet to sweep, but within a few minutes we had found a small clearing with large cement squares in the middle. There were metal railings blocking off the center of the cement, and the metal line was bisecting the center of it all. We quickly realized that we are looking at a nuclear silo placed out in the middle of nowhere. A few of the guys start talking about how we could take shelter inside the silo, but most of the others are quick to say no. It's too dangerous and will waste time. Still, a few people find the entrance. It's basically like a manhole a few feet away, and they pull off the cover. We start going over a couple of guys at a time to check it out. When I go over there, I shine my tack light down through the hole and circle around to get a better angle. I can see there's a ladder that goes down quite a ways, but it's not until I stepped up to the edge of the hole that I can see the ladder goes down about 50 feet down into pitch blackness, and there are several levels below it too. I started to get chills just looking down there, but it made me feel very uneasy. It's very hard to explain. It felt like that there was something down there, staring back from the darkness. I stepped away and sat down on the railing with a guy from our search team. I could see he was still shaking slightly, and I looked at his face, and I saw tears. He was crying a little bit too. He was only 16, one of our younger players on the team. I told him that we're going to be okay, and then I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I told him to breathe like I was, and he would start to feel better. When we started breathing in unison for a couple minutes, which definitely helped the both of us out, to be honest. I hit it well, but I was losing my shit as well. After we came to the unanimous conclusion that none of us were going down into the silo, a couple of guys yelled down inside just to be sure that somehow, for some reason, that the missing man wasn't in there. We all knew that he wasn't, but we wanted to reassure ourselves that we were doing our best to find him, since everything else had just gone topsy-turvy. I had almost forgotten about our original search mission with everything else that had happened to us. It was only about a minute that passed until I heard the radio chatter again. This time, it was about calling off the search because of, quote, adverse conditions. The squad leader said that we needed to move 1.5 miles to our east-southeast to meet up with some Hummers that were going to come get us. We collected all of our stuff and got moving quickly. We moved in pairs and numbered off so we didn't lose anybody. Basically, we kept repeating our numbers up the line. This would be 9, 10, 11, up, 7 and 8, up, 5 and 6, up. And once we got to 1 and 2, we started to the back of the line again. After about 3 minutes of jogging, we heard a deep, low moaning, but it was almost like it was reverberating throughout the whole valley we were in. Another couple of minutes and the trees started getting way too close together again, so tight that we had to slow down and slip single file between the branches and trunks. Right after we had all squeezed through, we heard a piercing, shrieking sound, which was immediately followed by the most blood-chilling roar we've heard yet. It echoed 3 times in the dense forest, and that's when we went into serious panic mode. We flat out sprinted the rest of the distance, about 1 mile, while yelling out our individual numbers occasionally. There were 5 grown men, and out of the 11, the rest were all older than 16. I didn't hear a single voice the whole time that didn't sound panicked and terrified. I could hear the urgency in everyone as we ran. I started to get lightheaded from sprinting 3/4 of a mile, but somehow I was able to keep going until I heard a loud whomp behind me, and then a dull groaning that you can only hear from someone that hits the ground hard. I yelled for my running buddy to come back, then looked behind me and saw the last guy in line number 11 slowly rolling over on the ground. We both ran over, scooped him up under his arms and got him to his feet. That was the moment. I looked up and caught an incredibly quick flash of whatever was following us. I can't describe what I saw. It was only a shadow in the trees about 100 feet away, but it looked so much larger than any animal I had ever seen. As we turned around our friend, I noticed that an 8-inch thick log had been jumped over a few seconds earlier, but it was now broken in half on the path, with splinters everywhere. Something roared loudly, about 10 feet to our left in the trees next to us. That was our cue to get the hell out of there. And everything after that happened in frames because I was in flight mode. I remember seeing lights pointed at us as we ran the last couple 100 yards to the Hummers with our buddy. He kept saying, "I don't want to be the last one in. Let me get in first. Oh God, please let me get in first. Don't leave me behind. I don't want to be last." I've never heard that much panic in anyone's voice before, or since. As we got within a few yards of the Hummer, I looked up and saw the gunner, who had swung around the .50 caliber in our direction. I saw fear in his eyes too, and he wasn't even one of the guys on our team. He was a guardsman, fully trained, and a grown man. He was truly scared. We threw our friend in the back of the third Hummer. Then, number 10 climbed in, and finally, I almost effortlessly hopped up 4 feet into the cargo area. The gunner called out, "Contact 3 o'clock," and asked if he could engage, but the vehicle commander said no, and told the driver to step on it and get out of there. Nobody said a word on the way back to the base. When we got back, even the Green Beret guys were watching the horizon and looking worried. The National Guard guys were freaked out, and pretty much everyone else was shaking like a leaf and didn't respond to questions right away. I don't know what the hell it was that we saw out there, but it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. And even the military guys had seen it because they called out contacts and were ready to engage whatever it was. I've had goosebumps the entire time I've been typing this up because of the memories. I haven't told this story before until now. By the way, if you're wondering where this was, it happened at a very large military camp / base in Wyoming in 2011. Apparently, they never found the National Guard guy who was lost, even when they sent out the helicopters with the front-facing thermal imaging or whatever it is. And that's basically it. They never found the guy. The command staff sent trained search and rescue teams over the next few weeks, and everyone who was out looking that night got debriefed with basically, don't ever talk about anything that happened out there. We all drove back home after that. It took most of us weeks to get over what happened, and by over, I mean get it off our minds so we weren't thinking about it 24/7. Every time I see a line of dead trees at night, my stomach tightens into a knot, and I have to slow down and control my breathing. I haven't gone camping since then either. Other than that, there's not really much else to say. That's what happened. So, that was pretty crazy, wasn't it? What do you think it was? Do you think that it was like a bunch of skinwalkers, a bunch of Bigfoot, a bunch of another cryptid? Do you think it was something else? Let me know down in the comments. Do you have a story of your own that you'd like to send in? I have an email in the description below where you can do that. And if you like what I do, then I have a PayPal and a Patreon that you can donate to if that's something you're into. And with that, I think that I will say thank you all for watching. And we just passed 14,000 subscribers, which is absolutely insane, to be honest. I never, ever considered that I would get 14,000 subscribers, and it's all thanks to you guys. So, thank you all for pulling up 14,000 stumps with me, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.